Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 344. Today we're going to talk about Star Wars Imperial Assault. This is a recent release, just released right before Christmas from Fantasy Flight Game. Plays 2 to 5 players, and it's just like Descent. If you haven't heard about this game already, basically Descent Star Wars. One player plays sort of the Overlord or the Imperial player in this case, and then the rest of the players play the Rebels, a little Rebel strike team, and they go on a series of missions. Now the game also has a 2-player skirmish mode, and I will talk about that. So I'm not going to go into super exhaustive details. There's already a good amount of information about this. I will go over some of the details. I will sort of spoil it right away. I'm a big fan of this game. If you watched my top 10 games of 2014, this is one that I had just recently gotten and played a couple of times at that point and was really impressed by it. So you've already been spoiled a little bit for the review there. Let's jump in and talk a little bit about some of the different parts of the game, and then I'll come back and give you kind of the review spiel. So obviously, Star Wars Imperial Assault takes place in the Star Wars universe. You can see Darth Vader here on the cover. Nobody's really going to be controlling any characters like Luke Skywalker or Han Solo directly. You can have them come into play as allies and things to sort of enhance your party. So I am currently running through a campaign with my gaming group. It's me and 3 other players. You can take a look at some of the characters that are available. The players in my group are currently using Mok Eshkare, which is, we just call him the elf. He's sort of a ranged type of character with a lot of stealth. And also Diala Pasil, who's kind of your wannabe Jedi. And finally, Gar Khan, who is basically Chewbacca. This is your big melee-oriented tank. Now, each character comes with a tiny deck of cards, and these are going to be the abilities and skills that they get throughout the course of the campaign. Now, the Wookiee character here starts with a Vibro Axe. Each character has sort of a starting weapon that they get. And here you can see by this iconography, it's a melee weapon, and so you have to be adjacent to use it for an attack, and you're going to roll a red and yellow die for attack. And most of the weapons have these little special abilities that can trigger on a combat attack. For example, you can see this blade has the ability to sort of proc a pierce or a cleave. So if we had rolled this die, for example, in combat, the little burst there is going to count as 1 hit, and the 2 lightning bolt looking icons can possibly trigger one of those procs. You can see here if I add this green die to combat, this would add 2 more hits, and it's got a range number. So if you're doing a ranged combat, you're going to take a look at these printed numbers here, and that number must be equal to or greater than the distance to your target. And you can see if I add a blue die here, that's going to add a little bit more range. So the different colored dice are better in different situations. Now here's an example of a card that one of our players has upgraded to. This is Wookiee Fortitude. You can see this gives you a special ability. And down here in the lower left-hand side is the XP cost. Now the Imperial player has similar deck choices. They have sort of a subversive deck, a more aggressive deck. So each player is going to choose a character. In the case of the Imperial player, they're going to choose one of their decks, sort of a different sort of style of flavor for that Imperial player. And then as you go through play missions and campaigns, you're going to get different amounts of experience that you can use to go dig through your deck and find a cool card to add and make that available for future play. So you can see here on the left, here's my Subversive Tactics deck that I've chosen for this particular campaign. And here's the example of the card back for the Military Might. Now here I've laid out just about everything that comes in the box. I've got a few cards and things set aside that I've removed from the campaign, but this is really just about everything. And of course the models are typical Fantasy Flight quality. They really hit it out of the park all the time in my experience with this type of thing. And they always make you feel like you got your money's worth, most definitely in relation to the components in the game. And the other production note to comment on, in addition to the models and the dice and the cardboard and everything, is the presentation of the game in terms of the rules. So the game comes here with 4 different books. So first you have your Learn to Play guide there. And honestly, I've never played Descent 2.0. It took me maybe 20 minutes to sort of go through that, set up the tutorial, and kind of learn the game that way. Very easy. The gameplay is super streamlined. There's not a lot of fiddliness or wonkiness that you can have with, you know, sort of miniature skirmish games. It's really streamlined. And then you're going to jump into, let's see, you have the, actually speaking of skirmish, you have the skirmish guide here, and this is very thin. It's very quick to get into. The combat and the gameplay is a little bit different from skirmish into, you know, the normal kind of campaign, but not really that different at all. The core rules are basically the same. And then you've got a nice big campaign guide here. And this is very easy to get into. There was a little bit of sort of, I don't know, I wouldn't call it struggle, but just getting used to how to read the campaign and read sort of the setup and all that. I am actually, as I said, the Imperial player, so it's important that that player probably owns the game and knows the game and is able to set up a nice environment for the other players to play in. I'll talk more about that later. And then you've got a rules reference guide, which is awesome. They've been doing this with all of their games, where they've got at least one sort of introductory prose style rule book and then sort of a reference indexed, very easy to look up. So if you need to look up line of sight examples, they're fantastic in this. There's some different movement examples. If you're going to move, this big walker character here, obviously that's going to be slightly different. So they give you all those kind of rules exceptions and things like, oh, this doesn't quite work the same as like a little guy that just goes from square to square. But the rules are streamlined and presented in an easy to digest way. So in the campaign, the turns are going to go as follows. The players or heroes will go first, and each of them has a little activation token. You'll flip that down once you've activated a character, and then it's going to be the Imperial player's turn. And then the Imperial player will take a look at one of their deployment cards, and they'll exhaust it, and they will activate all of the units and figures on the board associated with that deployment card. So if we take a look at a troop of stormtroopers, we can take a look at the deployment card associated with them. There's a few things to note. If we look there in the upper left-hand corner, you can see two numbers, a 6 and a 2. If during the campaign you want to deploy an additional little troop of stormtroopers, it's going to cost you 6 threat, and it's going to cost you 2 threat to fill out any troop that might have been depleted. And these little hash marks here tell you how many of that type of unit can go with a particular deployment card. Now here we can see some of the special abilities, and again some of the procs that will happen when this particular type of unit rolls in combat. Now similarly to the hero character sheets, we also have health, which is the number of hit points they can take before becoming wounded, or in the case of these stormtroopers, dying. Speed is the number of squares that they can move. And defense is, again, the dice that they'll roll, and then in this case the stormtroopers have a ranged attack indicated by the gun, and they'll roll a blue and green die. So play is going to go back and forth like that. The players will decide who they want to act. One of the characters will act. They'll get 2 actions. That could be moving, attacking, maybe activating one of the special abilities either on their character sheet or on one of the cards that they've acquired throughout the campaign. And then the Imperial player will activate one of the groups, and they will do 2 actions with each of those figures. Now the Imperial player cannot attack twice. So if the player, the hero wanted, they could do 2 attacks, but none of the figures on the Imperial side can actually do 2 attacks. They have to move and attack. And then they're going to go back and forth like that. Now in the campaign, it's very interesting as the Imperial player, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but as you play through the campaign, you're going to need to be aware of what the round limit is. So maybe this is a particular scenario that only goes 7 rounds and then it'll end, and the heroes have to accomplish some goal by the end of the 7th round. And so you'll read that to the players, you'll read a little bit of the flavor text, tell them like, oh, you can go interact with these terminals, you've got to kill this guy or do whatever. And then there might be little certain things that'll trigger throughout the campaign. And I almost don't want to say anything, but there's something that the players often do that seems to always trigger something, usually when they open a certain thing. And so now the players are aware of my campaign, well, don't open that because something's going to happen, but we have to open that because that's where the goal is. So that's interesting. But so that's going to happen. So you need to be aware, like maybe something comes in at round 5, like, okay, this guy surprises them or does something like that, or certain conditions, not just, necessarily opening things. But so you want to be kind of read ahead and do that. And as the Imperial player, I've found now that you really want to keep in mind, it's sort of like herding cats though, is herding them towards a certain thing so that you can kind of come out on top. And I'll talk a little more about the campaigns in general, but it's a lot of back and forth, and from the Imperial player's perspective, you're trying to surprise them in some ways and ambush them in a lot of ways. And the players need to be aware that that's going to happen and sort of plan accordingly and think thematically about the scenario and the setup and what could happen. Now let's talk quickly about combat. This game has one of the most streamlined combats I've ever seen in a game. So here's a possible result of a blue and a red die. So the attacker rolled those. They've got 4 hits, a range of 4. Let's pretend that was enough to reach the target. And they've got a proc ability there with the lightning bolt. Now let's pretend the defender had a defense of 1 white die. So they've rolled that. Now you can see this sort of triangle looking mark here will actually cancel one of the hit icons, and this split circle will cancel one of the procs or one of the lightning bolts. Now if the defender had rolled this dodge symbol, the whole attack would have missed. It's interesting to note the white one on the surface isn't actually as good as the black defense die, as the black defense die has a better chance to roll more blocks, but there's no dodge on the black die. So a quick line of sight example, we can see our friendly elf character here. He actually does have line of sight with the stormtrooper, and the way the line of sight works is you need to draw a straight line from one of the corners of your square to two of the corners of the defender's square, and you can even draw a line through the target figure and count one of those squares as well. Now the two lines you draw cannot overlap each other, and I'll just say there's plenty of fine examples in the rulebook making this very clear. And this is kind of neat because it kind of allows for peeking around things, which makes sense with this universe and this style of game. There will also be things that players can interact with. Here's a terminal. You may have to take an interaction action. You might need to destroy it. There might also be crates, and players can interact with those to open those, and they can find little loot like this shock grenade, which will give them a special ability they can use in the current campaign, and this will also give them some extra credits that they can use to spend to upgrade in between missions. And here we can see a couple of the reward decks. The deck on the left there that may get certain rewards for completing special type objectives. And then in between each mission, we'll flip cards out of the deck on the right, depending on how far along we are in the campaign. And these will be items that the players can purchase. You can see there's a marksman barrel that'll add to accuracy, and there's a special gun, and there's going to be all kinds of different things that they can buy between missions. And speaking of missions, there's going to be a deck here of story missions, and there's also a deck of side missions. And the side mission deck will be pre-built before you start the campaign. And this can change up from campaign to campaign. And you can see here a deck of influence cards that the Imperial player can take and sort of add secretly as they gain influence through each mission. Finally, before I jump into the review portion, I just want to show you there's a big deck of these command cards. And these are used in the skirmish game. So players will build up an army of X number of points, and then you'll each be able to build a deck of these cards as well. And most of these right now cost 0 points. You can see here on the lower left of this recovery card. But you can play these as sometimes actions or augmenting actions during a skirmish to give you kind of lead up on the other player. Now, the skirmish mode is just the same as the campaign mode. You've got the same kind of dice for combat, same rules of line of sight. You have different objectives that you can do, so there are different scenarios that you can play through, but what you're going to do is build up an army. There's the army cost, which is the same as the threat cost that I showed you on those deployment cards. There are deployment cards for some of the rebel figures and then other characters like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. So you can use your, mock escadre that you use in the campaign in the skirmish mode. And those cards are interesting because you start with like 3 or 4, I don't remember exactly, and then you can just kind of play them as you want. Now you only draw 1 card per turn, but if you control some terminals, there's always going to be terminals on the map in the skirmish mode, you can draw additional cards. So the card plays, it's such a silly sort of very streamlined mechanic, but it actually works because you've got a very small deck of 15 cards, and you basically are pushing your luck as when do I play this card? When is it going to be most opportune? So you've got your deck of cards and that's it. Once you run out, you're done. So do I play this card to do a double attack or get some extra movement now? Well, it's not really a crucial moment yet in the scenario or whatever the objective might be. And you're going to get victory points for doing certain things and also destroying your opponent's characters and things. So the card deck thing is, to me, this is kind of sums up the whole game, and I'll move right into the review. I'm like, this is so streamlined. The dice, the combat are so streamlined. Those command decks are very streamlined in skirmish, but it just kind of works. And, it doesn't feel like anything new, even though I've never played Descent, so it does kind of feel new to me. It's just like, wow, they just like punched this thing out of some like massive, to me, it goes to show you like what a big sort of company of massive amounts of playtesters and developers and people that have really worked and refined this thing. Because you got to remember, this really has its roots back in like Doom or Descent 1.0. And, and that kind of trickles back to Space Hulk, where I think Doom was kind of based on. And so this sort of style of game and system has really been refined, and you can tell because there doesn't seem to be anything really flawed with this. Now, I have done some research because I am playing the Imperial player about certain things, because we are playing 3 characters versus 1 Imperial player. I've seen some gnashing of teeth about player balance and individual scenario balance. And I kind of thought that there might be some merit to that, and there still might be. I haven't played through the entire campaign, but I found that as I'm learning as the Imperial player, for example, I sort of won, quote unquote, my first scenario the other day. I was like, okay, I'm kind of getting the hang of this now. I don't really see there being a big imbalance. Now, in our case, when we're playing with 3, they get sort of a hit point bonus, and one of their characters can activate twice per round. So those little activation tokens, they each get one, but then one of them can activate twice, and he has to give that to another character so they activate twice on the following round. So it kind of makes up for the number of activations. They get a little bit more hit points, so it's kind of like there's a 4th player there. I haven't really seen a problem. I've only ever been able to wound one. Basically, you flip over their character card a little bit weaker. Once per any of the missions. I've never been able to wound more than one, but that's not really the secret of the game, is to go and kill everybody. It's to complete the objective, or in the Imperial player's case, prevent them from completing the objective. And one thing that's really interesting about this is it is designed from the ground up to be a campaign. It's not a one-off thing, except for the skirmish mode. So if I win or lose a scenario, the rules even say it doesn't matter until the finale scenario, then that player's won the game. And at that point, like, who cares who won? I mean, if both players played their best, or both groups of players played their best, that's all that matters. You had fun playing through, I don't know how many will it take. You can kind of gear the campaign. It's going to be at least, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 missions at least. But the Imperial player, through some of the influence cards, can sort of force missions. And if the players don't do that, the Imperial player gets like a big benefit. So it's possible to have, like, 2, 3, or 4, it looks like, extra forced missions, probably more than that, I think. So you've got like a 15 mission campaign, 10 to 15 missions, let's say. That's more than enough. And my hunch is, after kind of reading through some of this stuff and playing it a bit and seeing how the side decks work and sort of the branching and arcing stories, because you're not always going to play through the exact same story either. Based on the outcome of a particular mission, it will go one way or the other. So you're going to load in that story and you're going to go this way. I would say it's worth at least 2 plays through the campaign, maybe more, but I would say for sure 2, because you're going to see some of the same stuff. So for example, the one that I won, as I was able to steer the players towards a particular type of thing and then surprise them, and there was no way they were winning that scenario at that point, because they had accomplished 2 or 3 out of the objectives, and I'm like, cool, you guys can do that. And I'll just slow you down, slow you down just enough, sort of act like this is important maybe, and then bam, the big guy shows up, and now there's no way you can get there. And I think they were able to, we didn't really play out the last round, but they were like, I was able to open the last door, but then there was no time to do the others. And then of course, like, all the Imperial reinforcements show up and they got to run away and all that stuff. So now playing through that scenario again, they're going to kind of know, where about this guy might show up and all that stuff. But thinking more about that, I was thinking, okay, that scenario is playable once, and the next time we play it, it'll just kind of feel like we're going through the motions. But I know that they know what they know, right? So I should be able to kind of, work around that. And there's going to be some randomness with the dice rolling and things. So it shouldn't be completely unreplayable, but I don't think I'd want to play it more than twice. So I'd say, at a minimum, this is why I come to my conclusion, at a minimum, you can play through the campaign twice. Now, you do get, when you get some of these extra packs, like for example, the game comes with sort of a Darth Vader guy and a Luke Skywalker guy. Those add some extra side mission cards. They add some extra skirmish missions. And if they continue that pattern with, getting new figures, like I know, for example, they're going to come out with a more sort of personalized ATST figure with a little general or something on top. If he comes with some side missions and some, extra skirmish modes and things, that's going to be great. That's amazing, because all of them cost like $7 to $10, $15, depending on where you buy them. I mean, that's awesome if you get a couple of skirmish missions and then a couple side missions. So by the time we finish this campaign, most of those figures are going to be out. They're going to be out this January, maybe February. I mean, don't hold me to that. That's just what I've been reading. And so if we play through the missions again as another campaign, there's going to be that many more different side quests to add in and things like that. So And of course, I bet they're going to come out with a big expansion. It's probably going to have Boba Fett and, you know, all that stuff. I will say, as a personal note, I haven't ever DM'd anything before. I've played D&D in college and, you know, stuff like that. And my friend actually has Descent, one of the guys that plays with us here. And I think he's just been DMing that. We haven't really played. I haven't played it at all, but the group kind of played it a little bit. But the style of group that we have, the campaign stuff doesn't really work because we have a game night with, like, depending on the night, 8 to 15 people, let's say, that show up. And so it's not really fair for 3 or 4 of us to kind of every week sequester ourselves and force everybody else to play something else, especially if we have a night where it's not as many players show up. So this style of game hasn't really been working, but this is actually working because, you know, we had the Pathfinder card game. We played that a few times as a group. I played that mostly solo at the end of the day. But I think this one will work because everybody's interested in playing this. So we've actually had people kind of swap out. Last time, the player who played the Jedi, he wasn't able to make it, Diala. And so another player's like, no, I want to play this. Let's try it out. And it's so easy and simple to teach. They just dropped in, you know, no big deal. Next time somebody else can play somebody else and all that kind of stuff. So it's easy to do. The scenarios seem to take about an hour, maybe, sometimes quicker. Sometimes I bet they'll go longer. I haven't played through them all. And sometimes they feel sort of like quick ones that are sort of side quests. The side quests kind of feel like, oh, this is kind of a quick one just for story reasons. And so if you approach it from that perspective, it does draw a really great narrative. And I feel even though I'm playing the Dungeon Master kind of guy, which is not really what I want to do, like I normally prefer co-op for this style of game, so everybody's kind of on the same team. It really works for this because I feel like I'm controlling the narrative a little bit, but I don't have to spend any time creating the world, which is always just so much of a time commitment for me or anybody that I don't really get into that style of game. But the story's all here in the campaign guide, and you've got more cards and things coming out. So it really controls that for me, but I can sort of inject that and, you know, act like a fool and, you know, I'll play with that narrative a little bit. And it keeps me engaged, and because I can just play and try to beat the snot out of the other team, and it doesn't really affect the outcome, you know, mission to mission until the very end, it's okay. Nobody's going to die. Nobody's going to, you know, lose their character permanently. So, yeah, I mean, this really fits a good niche, and I think a lot of groups should take a look at this because it's quick to set up, it's streamlined, it's easy to get into. If you like Star Wars, of course, I would take a look at it. And you can get those play sessions in where we've been able to work it into a game night. And, you know, it's like, okay, you guys are going to go play, you know, Eldritch Horror or Versailles or some other game. And we're going to play this. And then once we're both done, then we can swap and mix players and all that stuff. So it really works in that way. And I don't know, I'm impressed by it. I mean, really, really impressed. So I will say just a couple other notes. I'm just going to ramble here for a second. There's a sheet on Board Game Geek. Print this out because it'll help you setting up the tiles. There's a ton of tiles and they're double-sided, and the longest part of setup is setting those up for each scenario. But that sheet will help you find the tile that you're looking for. But that's really the only real pain with setup. Yeah, I mean, as far as the skirmish goes, I think it's an okay skirmish mode. At the end of the day, I think it's going to be more interesting in terms of building your command deck and building your armies once there's more stuff. But you kind of want somebody else to have the game too, so they can build decks and maybe you would go against them. I guess you could build decks for, you know, multiple decks and multiple armies, and then you'd say, hey, you play these guys and I'll play these guys. It's okay. I don't really feel a desire to play it, though. That's the thing. It's not bad, and it's not, I don't think it's too simple or anything. It's just, I'm really into the campaign. That's probably part of it. And, you know, I think it could be nice as a 2-player. You kind of play the scenarios. I like that they've done that, where you have to, like, you know, take off in a spaceship or something, or smuggle some illicit goods, you know, as far as the scenario goes. But in terms of like playing it competitively, you know, in something, it doesn't feel like quite as mano a mano as like playing Netrunner or Mage Wars or Doomtown or Battle Lore and that kind of thing. I don't really get into the tactical strategic side of it. I'm more like, hey, it's just another scenario. It's kind of a one-shot, not to do with the campaign. There's only 2 of us. Let's play it. That's the scenario that I would play this in. But I know they're coming out with like an organized play kit and all that stuff. So it would be interesting. It seems like all the Star Wars games, they're competitive games. They got X-Wing. I assume Armada will have some competitiveness to it. And of course they have Netrunner and things, but interesting. You know, it's kind of like this is going to be their land competitive game. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if it's that strong, but I didn't really think X-Wing was going to take off as much as it has competitively either. And it really has quite a bit. So that's it. I would say definitely get it. It's definitely worth the price in terms of components. It's worth the fun. It's very easy to get into. It's not complex. It's not overwhelming. I think even for new-ish gamers, let's say, the rules are presented so easy to get into, and you're going to have to spend a little bit of time between missions, you know, kind of organizing things and saying, okay, you chose this. There's some campaign sheets you can print out, but it's not a lot to track at all. And yeah, I'd say the parting thought I want to just part with is it feels completely polished, so polished, and like the mechanics don't really excite me too much because it's very tactical, combat oriented. It's so combat oriented that some of these other style of games that they do a little bit more than combat, but on the other side of it, as the Imperial player and going through and surprising people, the surprises in the missions feel thematic. So that to me saves it and brings it up. And that's why I kind of was at the end of the year, I was like, oh, I can't really review this yet because I feel like there's something there, but it's not punching me over the head with how amazing am I, how great am I? You know, the game wasn't saying that to me, but I knew there was kind of something there. And I kind of liken it now to a lot of these video game reviewer guys, they review MMOs, and I've seen that when they review it, they're like, yeah, I started playing and I played 40 hours, they'll get back to me in 3 weeks. And I'm like, that's how you got to review these style games, because now that I've played through the campaign more and played it a little bit, now I have a better idea. Like, it felt good, it felt polished, it felt all these things, but I didn't really know what was under the covers. And there's still a lot I don't know. I could probably come and review this in 6 months, or probably earlier than that, and then review it after I've completed the campaign or something, because there's a lot there and they're going to add so much. So it's a tricky game to review, not having completed the campaign, which is really the point. Anyway, so totally get it. That's all I got to say. All right, thanks. Bye.